Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, if you're like me, you're really G'd up to play the warrior in Path of Exile 2. Unfortunately, whether or not people agree or disagree, I don't really care. I've spent about 80 hours playing the warrior at this stage over 4 or 5 different toons. Currently, in the current state of the game, melee is just not very forgiving. Now, the difference here is if you're playing the monk, monk is like easy mode once it starts to level through the campaign. The warrior, however, is not. It is a grueling slog, only made for players who, quite frankly, hate themselves enough to want to try and play melee. The game experience between the melee class, being the warrior, and like a range class that's running like gas grenade, or something of that nature, is just totally different in Path of Exile 2, and hopefully this is improved into the future. Now, that being said, this isn't a video about complaints. This is a video of overcoming these issues, and I'm going to run through some of the things that I've done to improve my warrior run. Now, the first thing that I'm probably going to say in this is a lot of people will say, oh, no, you just need to do this, or you just need to do this, or once you unlock this, it's really easy. No. I've tried like 6 or 7 different variations of the tree with multiple levels of different gearing. I've tried leveling up to armor break, which seems to be the best approach that I've found, at least with my playstyle, and then trying to level up to stun build up. And quite frankly, the warrior is just a slog. Either way you shake it, it's just never going to be easy with the current way the game's structured. I've heard a lot of people that have berated other people about the warrior being totally easy. Yes, when you get to endgame, it is really powerful, and that's why I'm committed to it, but the early game is just straight up bad. That being said, this video is designed to help you get through the first 3 acts. Once you get past the first 3 acts, which I consider the, I guess, worst balanced acts in the game currently, it actually gets a lot easier to level up with the warrior because you've got access to a lot more gear. But this is going to give you a few tips that you can use, and I'm going to give you the breakpoints in each of the acts that I figured out as I played through over 80 hours of mastering how to level up a warrior to basically get you through the bottleneck that you might currently be facing with trying to level up and play the warrior, because maybe you like me and you like melee. And hopefully this gives you some insightful advice as to how to achieve that. Okay, so the first tip that I'll give you here is don't play this class as your first character. Don't make the mistake that I made with playing this. I've progressed a lot slower than most other players as a result of my absolute, insolence to want to play warrior among all other things. I found it really difficult coming from Path of Exile 1 in particular, because I tried to look at the warrior as I need to balance defenses. Essentially, the way that Path of Exile currently works, or PoE 2 works, is you have to front load offense and pick between stun build up or armor break. If you do something in between, it may work, but realistically, pick one or the other and move forwards with it. And then you're looking for skills that synergize. For example, Sunder synergizes off armor break because you do additional damage based on broken armor. And that's basically the direction that I went with my build in the end, after basically hitting my head against the wall. So yeah, beyond that, what I would actually do is play a different class that's a lot more streamlined, like a monk, or maybe the mercenary, or the ranger, the Deadeye in particular, and play something that you can actually level up and farm through the game with. You'll have a lot more fun in your first run through, and you won't be struggling as much. Though the warrior looks really cool, you require gear to get it working early on. We'll talk about that later in this video, and you require a lot of gear that you really just can't get early on in the game, which is unfortunate. Okay, so this one's a little counterintuitive, and you wouldn't expect that this would be the situation. But on the warrior, Mace Strike is your default ability. Now, this ability levels up as you level up, so you get more sockets as you level up, because it's basically your go-to single ability you'll have all throughout the game, and it's locked to your weapon being the mace. So as long as you run the mace, you get Mace Strike. Actually is the highest DPS ability on the warrior at pretty much every level, irrefutably. And from level 1 onwards, Mace Strike will literally be your go-to skill. And it seems sort of dumb, and it is dumb, that your base default skill is actually your best skill. But right now I'm using a combination of Armor Break and Armor Explode, and I clear massive packs simply by Mace Striking enemies. And this was a mistake that I made first up. I thought that loading up like Rolling Slam, things like that, would be a really good idea. I tried to be smarter than what the game actually was, and didn't realize that default attack was actually your best ability that you had in the game, and that you'll have pretty much all the way through with this class. Is this right? I don't know, and it probably is, begs the question of whether or not this should be the case. But at this stage, don't forget to use Mace Strike. Mace Strike will get you out of a lot of strife. Trying to load up skills is great. This skill, have it mapped to your left mouse click at all times, and get ready to just like essentially lay into enemies for a long drawn out fight, because this is basically how you build up stun, how you build up your armor break, everything else in between. Okay, so the next thing that assists a hell of a lot with the warrior is two actual things, right? So Earthquake is really useful. In particular, you can drop it, you can stack armor break without having to get too close to the enemy, and then that allows you to do things like sunder the enemy, which then does tons of damage. But the thing that helped me the most throughout the campaign, especially early on, was actually using the seismic totem skill. So basically, I could use this with overabundance, and overabundance allows for a second totem to be cast. It does have a reduced skill effect duration, but it doesn't really matter, because basically what this does is it creates a bit of zoning, so that enemies go after the totems a bit more than you. I actually used this in particular when taking on Jorgen in Act 2, and I was able to do it basically first time that I tried. As long as you met the minimum breakpoints in order to beat him, it is possible to do that relatively easily. But basically, you just gotta wail away at him and then keep dropping totems, and then rely on health regeneration to essentially prop you back up. But totems definitely helped a hell of a lot in the leveling process when I was running the warrior. And so if you haven't been using totems, totems are a big game changer. All right, so the next one's a bit of part of the reason why I said play it as a second character. Essentially, you're going to get exalt drops as you're leveling up. Now, the game would have it so that you should use these for upgrades, and you should, but you should keep a few there, because what you want to do is go onto the market and you want to overgear your character. Now, what does that mean? That basically means you're going to buy gear that is much higher for the character. One of the biggest problems with the maces in particular is if you compare them to, for example, quarterstaffs, there are limitations with the attack speed on maces is number one. One solution around this could be run dual single mace, and this might also be a big assister to you. So, that'll give you a lot more attack speed, so then you'll be able to take enemies out a lot more efficiently. But if you're running a two-handed mace, you basically want to have a much bigger and much stronger mace than what the content currently allows you to have earlier on. Now, you could sit there and try and craft that, and again, like, that's going to take tons of currency, but the easiest way is to go onto the trade market, onto the PoE trade website, and I'll put a link in the description for it, and just go and buy an item for like 1x. That's going to take you through. So the breakpoints for DPS in Act 1 is a weapon that is a two-handed weapon that is around about 40 to 50 DPS by the end. Anything less than that is going to be a total struggle to take down the final boss. Anything higher than that, even better. In Act 2, you need a weapon that's about 100 DPS on the weapon. That's the weapon stat on the actual weapon itself. So about 100 DPS will get you through Jorgen. It's still going to take a fair few whacks of the mace, but it's going to work. And then the Act 3 breakpoint to take on Doryani was around about 170 DPS, or 160 to 170 DPS on your weapon. Now, the problem with this, in every single act, you do not easily get weapons that drop for maces that have these damage numbers. So this is why people are struggling. The damage output on mace skills just isn't there. The attack speed's really slow, the skills take a lot of load up time, so you need to compensate for that sloth nature of the build with higher DPS, and the easiest way to get around that is simply just use the exalt drops that you get to overgear your character as best you can. And I'll do a separate video if people want me to around how to filter for gear and whatnot, and how to use the trade website. I'm more than happy to. In fact, I might do that tomorrow night. But yeah, overgearing your character is going to give you a huge advantage, very similar to overleveling your character as well. And that's going to basically be going out, farming out additional levels, but you only want to be like 2 to 3 levels higher than the content that you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, there's a critical problem with your build that you need to fix. And that's also part of the problem with the early campaign, is there's a lot of like balancing in that Act 1 to 3, which isn't really conducive to an easy new player experience with a class like Warrior. And the other thing will be, we'll talk about the next thing, I guess, in the next part of the video that you need to be aware of when you do run the Warrior. Alright, so the fifth tip that I've got here is the closer, the better off you are. And what does this mean? Basically, you want to be, like, up in the enemy's grills. Like, with the warrior, you have no real advantage of standing back. Even when you're rolling, like, sorry, not rolling Sunder, I was going to say. But even when you're running, like, Sunder, for example, you want to be pretty close to the enemy, and you want to be constantly dodge rolling the enemy. Unfortunately, what that means is you're going to have to become a master of fighting enemies. You're not going to be able to stand back and just blast them with a gas grenade or rely on minions. Now, my build that I got working to endgame was minions, and it was just a cakewalk, right? It was so easy to play through with minions because you don't have to get near the enemy. You can just sit back and cast on it. This is why a lot of people are saying, oh, the game's really easy, because yeah, it's going to be easy when you can just sit back on the other side of the screen and nuke the enemy, and then basically only have to, like, you know, kite the enemy around every now and again if it starts to, you know, latch onto you. With the warrior, it's a bit different. You're going to be getting close and personal. You have no choice. You're using a melee weapon. Monk has a lot more mobility than the warrior, so you're going to have to start learning how to do predictive, I guess, basically predicting enemies' telegraph movements and whatnot in the first 3 acts. This is actually really difficult early on, and there are some enemies where this just isn't really possible. For example, the lightning storm or the lightning rods that come from Jumanra is just totally painful, and yeah, you're going to have a lot of difficulty with that. Part of it is the boss design isn't currently very good around melee and how you approach it with melee. It's really, really punishing. It doesn't really give you any real room for error. And so essentially, yeah, you're probably still going to find yourself getting one clapped. I'm still finding that in Act 4. But essentially, if you're using a combination of seismic totems, earthquake to apply damage when you run away from the enemy so you can get a bit of a respite, and then you go back in with a big hit like Sunder or something like that, or with, you know, with your Mace Strike, then you can overcome most enemies. It's just a much more drawn out fight, and that's part of why the warrior is very frustrating. It just, you've got every disadvantage. You've got less attack speed, you've got wind-ups on your skills, you're much slower than other builds. Monk just totally has an advantage in that area. And basically you have to rely on either really big hits, or you have to hit a whole lot of times to take an enemy down. And so yeah, unfortunately there's an element of this that will come back to. You'll need to learn how to duck, dive, dodge, dip, and duck, as they said from Patches O'Houlihan from Dodgeball. Is it fun initially on your first playthrough? No, and this is exactly why I don't recommend Warrior as your first build that you walk into. It's just very involved, and also don't do it half asleep like what I've tried, or if you're really tired from work, because you're just going to give up at the end of it all. It gets quite frustrating after a while, until you get to endgame when you can just face tank stuff. Alright, so the next one's a given, and you would do this with any class, but you have to in particular do this a lot more on the warrior because you're going to get hit a lot more. And essentially, here are the breakpoints for the different acts that you'll need to look to overcap your resistances with. So in Act 1, I had to overcap to about 40, or I had to cap to 45% cold res. The reason being is the first act boss is very heavy on the cold damage. And so if you've got overcapped resistances, or at least like 45 to 50% resistance, this makes your Act 1 boss encounter quite easily. I know some of the comments from players is, I'm just getting blasted by that boss. The reason being is that you can't take the damage because you don't mitigate the cold. Once you can mitigate the cold, then that fight gets a hell of a lot easier. In relation to Jumanra, this one's a bit of a pain. But basically, if you use 2 lightning resistance rings with whatever rolls you can get on them for additional resistances, and you can focus on trying to cap your lightning resistance to like 60 to 70%, then Jumanra just becomes an exercise of attrition. And so you're just going to hit at him until he dies. And also bear in mind, you need about 30 life regeneration to do this fight, where you could just walk away, drop a couple totems, regenerate, and then go in again for a bit of an attack strike on him. 60% armor also help with this particular boss as well. So just to recap for Jumanra, you want about 30 life regeneration, about 60% lightning res, and 60% armor on your build at that point in the game. If you've got anything less, you're going to have a really, really rocky fight taking him on. I was able to essentially face tank him, so that worked really well for me for Act 2, and that's where a lot of people are getting stuck, unfortunately, when they do play through on the warrior currently. Now, for the Act 3 breakpoints, Doryani's a much easier fight than the other two Act bosses I'd consider, because he's just like a sloth. You just like have to dodge a couple of his big hits, and more or less if you stay on his grill straight up inside, you know, his like attack zone, it's very easy to take him down. Now, I did that boss at about 40 to 60% fire and lightning res, and because he has two elements that he favors, which is fire and lightning, and then also the boss up in the like the apex, whatever it is also a little difficult with fire, so you need about 40 to 60% fire res for that. I also managed to tank a lot of his hits and or recover with about 50 HP regeneration per second on the build that I'm currently running when I was leveling it up, and I needed about 170 max DPS on my weapon to be able to take him down efficiently. That fight still took a while, but basically overcapping reses and having a good, again, I think I did that at about 52% armor. That made a whole heap of difference. I think we discredit HP regeneration in this game when taking on bosses, but for the warrior, it is a battle of attrition and you need to outlast the fight. You're going to run out of flash charges, and so being able to run back and just recharge quickly enough is a huge advantage on the warrior versus other builds which can just blast out a lot more damage. The warrior early on really struggles in the damage department, so we have to be able to balance that out a bit better. So if you're stuck on Act 3, basically that's the go. 40 to 60% fire and lightning res, 50 HP regeneration, and about 52 to 60% armor again overall on your gear, and about 170 or 160 to 170 DPS on your two-hand weapon, or a combination of two one-handed maces that meet that criteria. Okay, another couple of things to bear in mind. So charm usage is really important situationally. You want to like change out your charms constantly depending on the resistance you need. You also want to have flasks that generate charges when you kill enemies as well. That's a huge advantage. And then also beyond that point, make sure every time you level up, you get a vendor change. So gear changes at the vendor or the merchants. Go back, recheck every time you level up and see if you can always consistently gear up. The other thing you also want to do is try and get as much attack speed into the build as well. You're really starved for attack rate on the warrior versus every other class. So any items, i.e. rolls on your mace, or maces, or rolls on your gloves that you can get for attack speed is a huge advantage. The other thing is you want to try and get some sort of additional spirit reservation because it allows you to run time and need. Time and need's a skill gem that essentially every 11 seconds or so gives you like a big chunk of health back. Again, huge advantage to have this when you're in the middle of a fight. I still haven't got it on my gear, but if you can get this early on in Act 1, 2, or 3, and you could potentially go into the market and get this, then that's going to be a huge advantage in gearing up and progressing your warrior through the campaign into the endgame. Okay, so hopefully these learnings help if you're really struggling with the warrior class. It is a really hard class, right? It is a hard class. And people who are saying that it's not hard, I don't know what they're doing. But for me, I might just be bad at the game. Who knows? Someone will probably egg me on for that in the comments below. But if you're like me and you're not as good at the game, apparently, then yeah, that's basically how you do it. Now, if I played any other class, I'd be breezing through like most others. But I really want to play an Armor Explode Warrior at this stage, and I am 100% hellbent on doing a crazy endgame build with that, and I'm committed to it. So that's basically where it's coming from. If you like this video, don't forget to like and sub to the channel and the future content coming out. There's going to be a lot of Path of Exile 2 content, and I apologize, I haven't had so many videos coming out for Path of Exile 2 as of late like other creators. I really wanted to learn the game instead of just pumping any old crap out to try and get clicks and views. I'd rather actually become a master of the game, be able to provide people with proper advice on how to balance builds and stuff like that moving forwards, than just like pump shit out the door. But anyway, I will see you guys later and have a good one.